Welcome, travellers of time and shadows. You've wandered once more into Lilly's Viking adventure, where myth, history, and legend come alive. But tonight, things take a darker turn. As the nights grow long and the veil between worlds grows thin, we turn not to sagas of heroism, but to the ghosts, curses, and restless spirits that haunted the minds of our ancestors. Long before horror films or haunted houses, there were tales whispered around firelight. Stories of vengeful dead brides, cursed kings, phantom warriors, and ancient souls who refused to rest. So in honor of the Halloween season, pour yourself a horn of mead, or perhaps something stronger, and join me as we travel across 5 ancient civilizations, uncovering the top 5 scariest stories from history. From the haunted tombs of Egypt to the icy barrows of the north. These are the stories that remind us fear is as old as humanity itself. This is Lilly's Viking adventure, and tonight we awaken the ancient dead. Before we get started, grab yourself a spiced tea, some snacks, and snuggle up with the like button. Turn down the lights. It's time for historical horror. Story 1. The Tale of the Dead Bride. Love Beyond the Grave. Long ago, in the shadowed centuries of the ancient world, when men still feared the unseen and the dead were never truly silent, there lived a Greek chronicler named Phlegon of Tralles. A freedman of Emperor Hadrian, Phlegon devoted himself to collecting marvels, miracles, and terrors, things that blurred the boundary between myth and truth. In his Book of Marvels, written in the 2nd century of our era, he recorded tales that defied explanation. And among them, none was more chilling, nor more tragically beautiful, than the story of Philinion and Machates, a tale that scholars today call the Dead Bride. The city of Amphipolis. Our story begins in Amphipolis, a prosperous city of northern Greece, its marble streets glinting beneath the Macedonian sun. Amphipolis was a place of merchants and warriors, but also of superstition, where the shades of the dead were honored and feared in equal measure. For the ancient Greeks believed the soul could never truly rest if denied its proper rights. To disturb the boundary between life and death was to court divine punishment. Among Amphipolis' noble families lived Demostratus and his wife Charito, known for their wealth and piety. Their daughter, Philinion, was the pride of their household, radiant, graceful, and kind-hearted. Yet as fate so often decrees in ancient tales, beauty was no shield against mortality. Before she reached the fullness of womanhood, Philinion fell gravely ill and died. Her parents, broken with grief, laid her to rest in a carved stone tomb outside the city walls, with jewels upon her breast and a golden cup in her hands, symbols of her purity and family honor. The tomb was sealed, offerings made, and her name whispered in morning prayers. But as the years passed, the sorrow faded, replaced by the dull ache of memory. Her parents resumed their lives, believing her soul had gone peacefully into the realm of Hades. They were wrong. A stranger arrives. One season, as winter approached and the nights grew long, a young man named Machates arrived in Amphipolis. He was a traveller from Pella, the old capital of Macedon, a place once ruled by the great Alexander's forefathers. Machates was learned, courteous, and well-born, and Demostratus welcomed him as a guest under his roof, as was the sacred custom of Xenia, guest friendship. By day, the household hummed with laughter and conversation, for Machates was full of stories and songs. But by night, when the lamps were dimmed and the fire burned low, strange things began to occur. One evening, long after the others had retired, Machates lay awake when a faint sound reached him. The soft rustle of footsteps, and then the creak of the door. He rose, startled, and saw before him a young woman, pale yet radiant, her eyes gleaming like moonlight on still water. She was dressed in fine garments of another time, her skin cool as marble. She spoke gently. "Do not be afraid, stranger. I am Felinion, daughter of Demostratus and Charito. The gods have permitted me to return, for a short while only, that I might know the warmth of love once more." Machates, thinking this must be a dream or a jest, was entranced. She was ethereal. Her voice carried the music of the grave, yet her lips were warm and real. She told him she had watched him since his arrival, and that destiny had bound them in a love that defied death itself. That night, they lay together in secret, and when dawn approached, she slipped away as silently as she had come. 6 nights of secret love. For 6 nights, Felinion came to him, always after sunset, always departing before the first rays of dawn. By lamplight, she would tell him stories of the underworld, of dim fields where shades wandered, and of rivers blacker than obsidian. She would laugh when he shuddered, saying she feared nothing now, for she had already crossed the veil once before. She brought with her small gifts, rings, trinkets, even a golden cup. He, in turn, offered her food and wine. She drank greedily, as though starving for mortal sensation. Her touch was soft, but cold, her gaze filled with sadness and longing. Machates did not tell his hosts. How could he? Who would believe that their dead daughter now visited his bed each night? But servants began to whisper. They saw a pale woman entering his chamber. They heard laughter in the night, and the sound of 2 voices. Fear spread quietly through the household, until one night, Charito herself decided to see the truth. The mother's discovery. Unable to bear her curiosity, Charito hid near the guest chamber. She waited in the dark, trembling, clutching a lamp to her chest. Near midnight, she heard footsteps, soft, measured, almost weightless. Then she saw her long-lost daughter, Felinion, gliding across the hall. The girl's face was both familiar and horrifying, the same lovely features she remembered, yet tinged with the pallor of the tomb. Charito's scream shattered the silence. She fainted where she stood. When she awoke, she told her husband what she had seen. Demostratus, skeptical yet shaken, gathered the servants and stormed into Machates' room. There, by the dying light of a lamp, stood Felinion, her cheeks white as marble, her eyes glistening like cold water. Demostratus demanded to know who she was. The girl turned slowly and answered in a calm, echoing voice. "It is I, Felinion. The gods, out of pity, have allowed me to live again for a brief time, so that I might be with the one I love. But now, because you have discovered me, my time among the living is ended." Then her body fell limp. Her head dropped forward, and the light in her eyes went out forever. The empty tomb. At dawn, Demostratus ordered her tomb opened before the gathered citizens of Amphipolis. When they broke the seal and removed the heavy stone lid, all fell silent. Inside the chamber there was no body, only the funeral shroud, the golden cup, and the ornaments that had once been buried with her. The same items now lay beside the cold corpse found in Machates' room. The priests declared it a sign from Hades, a warning that the laws of death had been broken. They ordered purification rituals and sacrifices to cleanse the household of its defilement. Machates, stricken with despair and horror, could not endure the thought that he had loved a revenant, a woman returned from the dead. Some say he went mad. Others say he took his own life, joining her in the world below. Interpretation and belief. To the people of Amphipolis, this was no myth. Phlegon of Tralles, writing centuries later, insisted the story was drawn from eyewitness testimony, recorded by local officials. He presented it not as fiction, but as a real event, evidence that the souls of the dead could sometimes re-inhabit their bodies. To the ancient Greeks, this tale touched on their deepest fears. Death was not merely an ending, but a transformation, and if the dead could return, it meant the balance between the worlds had been shattered. In Greek belief, to die without proper rest or purpose was to risk becoming a revenant, a restless spirit. These spirits, called auroi or ataphoi, often returned for love, vengeance, or unfinished duty. Philinion's story may have been told and retold around hearth fires as a warning that even the purest love, when mixed with the power of the grave, could become monstrous. Phlegon's account prefigures later tales of vampires, ghost brides, and spectral lovers. Scholars even see it as an ancestor of Gothic literature, a bridge between the ancient and the modern imagination of horror. Legacy and symbolism. Over the centuries, the story of the dead bride endured, whispered through temples and academies. To some, it was a tragic romance, a love so powerful that it defied even death. To others, it was a tale of cosmic transgression, of mortals who dared to cross divine boundaries. Philinion embodies both beauty and corruption, the allure of the dead who walk among the living. Her return is not an act of evil but of yearning. She desires life, warmth, and love. Yet by seeking them, she brings only ruin. Machates represents humanity's fatal curiosity, his willingness to embrace the impossible, to love what should not be. In doing so, he mirrors a truth that echoes through all ages, that love and death are bound together, each giving meaning to the other. Epilogue. When the tomb was resealed and the rites completed, the people of Amphipolis swore never to speak of Philinion again. But such stories have a way of surviving. They linger, like candlelight in a crypt, flickering but never extinguished. And perhaps that is why Phlegon recorded it, to remind us that the oldest horror of all is not the monster in the shadows, but the thought that love might call the dead back from their graves, and that they might answer. Story 2. The Tale of Oiwa, Japan's tragic ghost bride. In the candlelit nights of Edo period Japan, when the line between honor and horror was razor thin, people whispered of a woman whose name became synonymous with vengeance. Oiwa. Her story, told and retold in Yotsuya Kaiden, has haunted Japanese hearts for over 3 centuries. It is not merely a ghost story. It is a tale of betrayal, beauty, and revenge that transcends death itself. A story of how cruelty can twist love into eternal wrath. Setting the scene, Edo, Japan. To understand Oiwa's tragedy, we must first step back into the Edo period, the 17th century, a time when samurai ruled, when duty and reputation meant everything, and when a woman's fate was often bound entirely to the will of her husband. The bustling city of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, was alive with merchants, theatres, and lanterns flickering against the night. But beneath its surface lay desperation, deceit, and ghosts waiting to be born. Among these people lived a woman named Oiwa. She was the devoted wife of Tamiya Yemon, a masterless samurai, a ronin. They were poor, but proud, living in a modest home near Yotsuya. Oiwa was gentle and loyal, the kind of woman the neighbors pitied, for her husband was a man of greed and weak character, ambitious, discontented, and hungry for wealth. the poisoned love. Imon had grown tired of poverty. He dreamed of reclaiming his former status, of living among the wealthy and powerful once more. And when a rich merchant's granddaughter, Ume, fell in love with him, the opportunity was too tempting to ignore. But there was one obstacle: Oiwa. To be rid of his wife, Imon conspired with Omi's family. They devised a plan. They would poison Oiwa under the pretense of giving her medicine for an illness. The potion, mixed with slow-acting poison, would destroy her beauty, the very thing she took pride in. Oiwa, ever trusting, drank what her husband offered her. Days later, she began to feel the effects. Her skin blistered. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her once delicate face grew distorted. One eye drooped, her mouth twisted into a grimace, her flesh pale and decaying. When she saw her reflection for the first time, she screamed, not just in horror, but in heartbreak. Her beauty, her pride, her humanity had been stolen. Then came the cruelest blow. A servant brought her a message, an invitation from another woman. When Oiwa learned that Yemen planned to remarry, she understood the full extent of his betrayal. Her pain turned to rage. Her love curdled into vengeance. The death of Oiwa. That night, Oiwa confronted Yemen. Weakened by the poison, she staggered toward him, her once graceful form now a ruin of suffering. In her trembling hand, she held a blade, a last act of defiance or perhaps despair. But fate dealt her one final cruelty. In her delirium, she tripped and fell, impaling herself upon the sword. As she died, she cursed Iemon's name, swearing that her spirit would never rest. Her final breath was a whisper of vengeance, carried into the darkness. They buried her hastily, with no ceremony, believing the matter ended. But the dead, especially the betrayed, have their own ways of returning. The haunting begins. At first, it began with whispers. Eamon heard her voice calling softly in the night. Eamon. He dismissed it as guilt. But soon, others heard it too. He began to see Oiwa's face, reflected in lanterns, in mirrors, in pools of water. Her twisted visage followed him wherever he went. Sometimes she smiled at him through the shadows. Sometimes her face slid down a paper screen, her eye dangling grotesquely as her mouth whispered promises of retribution. When Yemen tried to marry Ume, Oiwa appeared before him during the ceremony, her disfigured ghost flickering in place of the bride. He cried out in terror and struck at her face, only to find he had killed Uma instead, her body lying broken in the tatami mat, where Oiwa's illusion had been. Haunted, hunted, and unraveling, Emin fled into the night, but Oiwa's ghost followed, relentless, patient, ever watching. The curse spreads. In the world of Japanese folklore, a spirit wronged in death becomes an onryo, a vengeful ghost, and Oiwa was the archetype. Her anger infected everything it touched. Eamon's servants died screaming, seeing her face before their final breath. Those who mocked her misfortune met miseries of their own. Fires, illnesses, and madness swept through their ranks. Oiwa's ghost did not merely seek revenge on her husband. She cursed the entire chain of betrayal. In one chilling scene often retold in kabuki theatre, Eamon lifts a paper lantern in the dark, and Oiwa's face blooms upon it, smiling horribly, her drooping eye and twisted mouth illuminated by the flame. Her voice rises in laughter, echoing from all sides until he smashes the lantern, only to find the face reappearing on every wall around him. Eamon's sanity shatters. He flees to the mountains, seeking to escape her, but the dead are not bound by distance. Wherever he goes, she follows, whispering, weeping, laughing. Finally, when he can bear it no more, he meets his end violently, killed by the very forces his greed set in motion. The legend's transformation. Oiwa's tale became the foundation of Yotsuya Kaidan, one of Japan's most famous ghost plays, written by Tsuruya Nanboku IV in 1825 for the kabuki stage. The story has been retold countless times, in plays, films, and novels, evolving from a local tragedy into a national legend. In kabuki, Oiwa's appearance is both beautiful and horrifying. Her face painted white, one eye drooping, her hair tangled and long, her kimono flowing like grave cloth. When she appears on stage, lanterns dim, and the audience feels a chill, as if the ghost herself has entered the theatre. Even today, Japanese actors who perform Yotsuya Kaidan often visit Oiwa's shrine before rehearsals, offering prayers to appease her spirit, fearing that to portray her without respect might awaken her wrath anew. Themes and symbolism. At its heart, the Tale of Oiwa is more than a ghost story. It is a moral reckoning. In Edo Japan, where women were expected to endure silently, Oiwa's vengeance was both terrifying and liberating. The revenge of every woman betrayed, every voice silenced. Her ghost embodies karma, the spiritual rebalancing of justice. Yaman's ambition, deceit, and cruelty return to him with supernatural force. The poison he used to destroy Oiwa's face becomes a mirror reflecting his own corruption. Oiwa also represents the fragile beauty of life and the inevitability of decay. Her physical disfigurement symbolizes the moral rot beneath society's polished surface. And her transformation into an onryo, a ghost of righteous fury, reminds the living that death does not always end in justice. Legacy in modern horror. Centuries later, Oiwa's ghost still lingers in Japan's cultural memory. Her face, with its half-drooping eye and grim smile, became an archetype for modern J-horror. Movies like The Ring, Ringu, and The Grudge, Ju-on, carry her essence. The pale woman with long black hair, her movement unnatural, her vengeance unstoppable. Even the way these spirits emerge, crawling, flickering, half seen in reflection, owes its terror to Oiwa's haunting image. Her story continues to be retold in manga, film, and theatre, sometimes as tragedy, sometimes as horror, always as warning. For in Japan, the ghost is never just a monster. It is a memory, a scar on the collective soul. Conclusion: the lantern still burns. In the centuries since Oiwa's death, her shrine at Yotsuya has become a place of pilgrimage. Visitors leave offerings of combs, mirrors, and hairpins, symbols of her lost beauty. Lanterns are lit in her honor, flickering softly against the night air. They say that if you whisper her name too loudly, her spirit might still hear, that her eye will find you in the reflection of a mirror, that her voice will echo in the quiet when you are alone. The tale of Oiwa is not just about vengeance. It is about love, twisted by betrayal, and the truth that even in death, a broken heart can still burn with the fury of the living. As long as the lanterns of Yotsuya glow, Oiwa's story will live on, a reminder that some ghosts never fade, and some wrongs are never forgotten. Story 3. The Tale of the House of Atreus, Blood in the Line of Kings. They say that some families are born under a curse, that the sins of one generation are never truly buried, but whisper through the blood of their descendants like ghosts. And in all the ancient world, no house was more cursed, more haunted, or more soaked in blood than the House of Atreus, a dynasty whose crimes defied both gods and mortals. This is a tale of betrayal, cannibalism, vengeance and madness, of kings and queens who murdered their kin, of sons who avenged their fathers, and of the gods who watched from Olympus, neither forgiving nor forgetting. It begins not with Agamemnon or Clytemnestra, not even with Orestes, but with their ancestor, a man whose arrogance shattered divine law. His name was Tantalus. The sin of Tantalus. Long before Troy fell, long before Mycenae's golden halls were stained with blood, there was Tantalus, a mortal favoured by the gods. He was a king of Lydia, beloved by Zeus himself, invited to dine at the tables of Olympus. But mortal pride is a dangerous thing. Tantalus wanted to test the gods, to see if their wisdom was truly divine, and so he committed a crime so monstrous it echoed through eternity. He took his own son, Pelops, killed him, boiled his flesh, and served it as a feast before the gods. It was a test. Would they recognize the meat of man when they tasted it? The gods recoiled in horror. All that is except Demeter, goddess of harvest, who in her grief for her lost daughter Persephone, absent-mindedly ate a single bite of the boy's shoulder. When Zeus discovered the deception, his fury was absolute. He restored Pelops to life, whole again, save for the shoulder Demeter had eaten, which he replaced with gleaming ivory. But Tantalus was damned. He was cast into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, to suffer eternally. His punishment became legend. He stood in a pool of water beneath fruit-laden branches. When he bent to drink, the water receded. When he reached for fruit, the branches withdrew. Forever thirsty, forever hungry, forever tantalized. And thus began the curse. For the gods decreed that his descendants would inherit his crime, each generation repeating the sin of pride and blood. The rise of Pelops and the seeds of betrayal. Pelops grew to manhood, shining and beautiful, and he sought the hand of Hippodamia, daughter of King Oenomaus of Pisa. But the king had been warned by an oracle that he would die at the hands of his son-in-law. So he challenged each suitor to a deadly chariot race, killing them one by one. Pelops, however, was cunning. He bribed the king's charioteer, Myrtilus, to sabotage the king's chariot. Oenomaus died, tangled in his own reins, and Pelops took both Hippodamia and the throne. But Pelops betrayed Myrtilus too, casting him into the sea to silence him. As Myrtilus drowned, he cursed Pelops and all his descendants. And the curse deepened. Atreus and Thyestes, the brothers' feast. From Pelops came two sons, Atreus and Thyestes, princes of Mycenae. Their rivalry would bring new horror to the family name. Atreus, the elder, seized the throne, but Thyestes coveted it. Through deceit and adultery, by seducing Atreus' wife Aerope, he stole the kingdom. When Atreus discovered the betrayal, his heart hardened into stone. He swore revenge not through battle, but through a feast of horror, echoing the sin of Tantalus himself. He pretended to reconcile, inviting his brother to a banquet in his honor. Thyestes feasted well, savoring the rich meat and fine wine, until Atreus revealed the truth. You dine upon your sons, brother. You have tasted your own blood. For Atreus had secretly slain Thyestes' children, cooked their flesh, and served it to their father. When the truth came to light, Thyestes vomited in horror and cursed the house of Atreus anew. He fled into exile, broken but alive. The gods turned their faces away. The line of Tantalus had repeated its ancestors' crime, and the curse had taken deeper root. Agamemnon, the king and his sacrifice. From Atreus came Agamemnon and Menelaus, kings of Mycenae and Sparta. Together they were powerful, but still haunted. For blood calls to blood, and divine wrath never dies easily. When Paris of Troy abducted Helen, Menelaus's wife, the brothers raised a great army to bring her back. But before the fleet could sail, the goddess Artemis stilled the winds. Angered by Agamemnon's arrogance, the seer Calchas declared that only one thing could appease her: a sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. Torn between love and ambition, the king deceived his wife Clytemnestra, telling her that Iphigenia was to be married to Achilles. When the girl arrived, she was taken to the altar and slain by her father's own hand. The winds rose and the fleet sailed for Troy. But back in Mycenae, Clytemnestra's heart blackened with hatred. She swore that when her husband returned, she would repay him in blood. The return and the murder. 10 years passed. Troy burned. Agamemnon returned home victorious, bringing with him a captive, the Trojan princess Cassandra, cursed with prophecy no one would believe. Clytemnestra welcomed her husband with smiles and false sweetness. She prepared the bath, laid out the red tapestries, and invited him to rest. But when he stepped into the steaming water, she cast a net over him, a hunting trap woven for a king, and struck him down with an axe. As he died, she cried out, "Thus I strike you as you struck our daughter. The blood you spilled returns to you." Cassandra too was slain, her prophecies fulfilled in her own death. Clytemnestra took the throne beside her lover Aegisthus, a son of Thyestes, the very bloodline her husband had cursed. The circle of vengeance had closed, but not ended. Orestes, the Sun and the Furies. Years later, Agamemnon's son Orestes returned to Mycenae, guided by the god Apollo, who demanded that he avenge his father's death. But Orestes faced an impossible choice, for vengeance demanded he kill his own mother. Haunted and torn between divine command and moral horror, Orestes entered the palace and struck Clytemnestra down. Her last words were not of remorse, but of defiance. "I gave you life, my son, and you give me death." When her blood stained the floor, Orestes was seized by madness. The Furies, ancient spirits of vengeance, rose from the shadows, shrieking and clawing at him, their serpentine hair writhing with hatred. No mortal could see them, but Orestes could. He fled through the night, pursued by the shrieks of the damned, until he fell before the altar of Apollo himself, begging for deliverance. The end of the curse. In time, Orestes was brought before the gods for judgment. The trial was held at Athens, overseen by Athena, goddess of wisdom. There, mortals and immortals debated whether his crime, the murder of his mother, could ever be justified. Athena cast the final vote. She declared Orestes absolved, ending the blood feud that had consumed his house for generations. The Furies, appeased at last, were transformed into the Eumenides, the kindly ones, guardians of justice rather than vengeance. And so the curse of the House of Atreus was broken, but not forgotten. Interpretation and legacy. The Greeks believed the House of Atreus symbolized the dark inheritance of sin, the way evil repeats itself through generations, like a shadow passed down in blood. From Tantalus's pride to Agamemnon's arrogance, from Clytemnestra's revenge to Orestes's madness, each act mirrors the one before. forming an unbroken chain of divine punishment. The dramatist Aeschylus captured this story in his trilogy, the Oresteia, 3 plays that chart humanity's progress from blood vengeance to lawful justice. It was not only a myth, but a meditation on civilization itself, that even in a world ruled by gods, there could be evolution from chaos toward order. But beneath that noble ending still lingers the terror, the image of the banquet table where a father serves his son, the bath where a husband is slaughtered, the son haunted by his mother's ghost. The House of Atreus stands as the ultimate Greek horror story, not of monsters or demons, but of human souls devoured by pride, vengeance, and madness. And in the flicker of torchlight on Mycenae's crumbling walls, one can still imagine the echo of their voices, whispering that no crime truly dies, no blood truly washes clean, and that the curse of the ancestors is the one horror we can never escape. Story 4. The Ghost of Nebusemekh, the restless spirit of ancient Egypt. In the Valley of Kings and Gods, where pyramids pierced the horizon and the Nile carried the lifeblood of civilization, death was not an ending, it was a continuation. For the ancient Egyptians believed that if the body was preserved and the soul properly honored, the dead could live forever. But when the living forgot, when tombs crumbled and names were erased, something terrible could awaken. From the sands of time comes one of the oldest ghost stories in the world, the Tale of Nebusemekh, the restless spirit who rose from his grave to demand justice from the living. This story survives from a fragment known as the Ghost Story of Nebusemekh, written during Egypt's Middle Kingdom, over 3,800 years ago, long before the Bible, before Homer, before almost every written legend we know. It is the voice of the ancient dead, crying out from eternity. The land of the living and the dead. To understand Nebusemek's haunting, we must enter the Egyptian view of the soul, for they did not believe the spirit was one simple thing. Each person had many parts. The ka, the life force, a double that needed food and drink after death. The ba, the soul that could fly between the worlds of the living and the dead. The ren, the name, which, if forgotten, condemned one to oblivion. And the ark, the luminous spirit, which only the righteous could become in the afterlife. The dead depended on the living to sustain them, through prayers, offerings, and remembrance. To neglect the tomb or erase the name was to doom the soul to hunger, thirst, and despair. And so the greatest fear of all was not death itself, but being forgotten. The priest's encounter. The story begins with a high priest named Consemhab, a man of learning and power, keeper of sacred rites. One night, as he walked among the tombs by torchlight, he heard a voice calling his name. It was low and mournful, yet clear as the wind in the reeds. He turned, and saw before him a figure neither living nor dead. The man's form flickered like firelight, his face weary, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Who are you?" the priest demanded. The spirit bowed his head. "I am Nebusemekh, overseer of the army under Pharaoh Mentuhotep. I served faithfully. I was buried with honor. But my tomb has collapsed, and my name is fading. There is no one left to pour water for me, no one to bring offerings. My car suffers hunger. My soul wanders in thirst." Consemhab trembled, for to speak with the dead was a sacred terror. But compassion stirred in him. He promised the ghost that he would investigate the ruin and restore his rest. The voice of the dead. the fragments of the ancient papyrus, Nebusemekh's words still survive, perhaps the oldest ghostly monologue in human history. He laments, "When I was alive, I commanded men, and my name was honored. But now I am forgotten. My tomb is destroyed, my body lost. The river floods over my grave. There is no priest to make libation for me. I hunger, and none come." His voice drips with loneliness and despair. For the Egyptians, this was a fate worse than torment, to exist in a shadow between life and death, unseen and unremembered. The ghost pleads for rebirth through memory. He begs the living priest to rebuild his tomb, to speak his name aloud, to ensure that the offerings will flow once more. The search for the tomb. Consamhab agrees to help, and by day he searches among the ancient burial grounds. The necropolis of Thebes, where hundreds of tombs lay half buried in the sand. He finds broken walls and shattered stelae, the carved stone slabs that once bore the names of the dead. He prays to the gods of the afterlife, Osiris, lord of the underworld, and Anubis, guardian of the tombs, to guide him. As he digs through the ruins, he finds traces of Nebusemekh's resting place, collapsed chambers, scattered bones, faded hieroglyphs carved in devotion to Ra, the sun god. That night, the ghost appears again. His form flickers brighter, his voice stronger. "You have found the place. Restore my name, rebuild my tomb, and I shall bless you. Neglect me, and I shall haunt this world until my car is fed and my memory renewed." Consamhab bows and promises to act, but even he fears the curse of the forgotten dead. A warning from the spirit world. In the Egypt of the pharaohs, ghosts were not always evil, but they were powerful. The Egyptians saw them as messengers of the imbalance between the worlds. If a spirit rose from its tomb, it meant something in the cosmic order had gone wrong. A ritual left unfinished. A name left unsaid. A grave disturbed. The story of Nebusemekh was therefore not merely horror, but warning. It reminded priests, kings, and commoners alike of their sacred duty to the dead. To remember was to preserve the world itself. To forget was to invite the wrath of those who had once been human, and who would not rest until justice was done. The restoration. Consamhab, moved by pity and fear, ordered his workers to restore the tomb. He had Nebusemekh's name carved once more into stone, and food offerings placed before it, bread, beer, water, and incense. He read the sacred prayers aloud, calling upon Ra to lift the soul of Nebusemekh into the afterlife. The ritual completed, he poured water onto the earth, whispering, "Drink, Ka of Nebusemekh. May your thirst be quenched. May you walk among the fields of peace." That night, the ghost appeared one final time, not as a flickering wraith, but radiant and calm. "My hunger is sated. My name endures. I am whole again. You, priest, shall be blessed among men." Then the figure dissolved into golden light, fading into the desert wind. Echoes through time. And so the haunting ended, not with an exorcism, but with compassion. In the mind of the ancient Egyptian, ghosts were not monsters. They were reminders that every human being, no matter how powerful, depends on memory to survive. For thousands of years, the Egyptians inscribed names into tombs, carved faces into statues, and painted offerings on walls so that the dead might never vanish. They feared what Nebusemekh became, the restless soul crying for remembrance. Even now, His story survives only because a scribe recorded it on a fragile papyrus. His words drifting down to us across nearly 4 millennia. And by speaking his name aloud today, Nebusemekh lives again. Meaning and legacy. The Ghost of Nebusemekh is not only the world's oldest recorded ghost story, it is one of humanity's first reflections on memory, death, and the need for remembrance. Where later cultures saw ghosts as horrors to be feared, the Egyptians saw them as part of a sacred balance, the continuation of life through ritual and respect. This haunting teaches that to be forgotten is the true death. The fear that inspired Nebusemekh's return is the same fear that drives us even now. The need to be remembered, to have our names spoken long after we are gone. His story inspired later Egyptian funerary rites and echoes in the texts of later civilizations, in the shade-haunted underworld of Homer, in the ghosts of Rome, and in the restless spirits of medieval Europe. But Nebusemekh was first, the lonely soldier who rose from his tomb to remind the living that eternity is built on memory. Story 5. The Draugr, the undead of the north. In the cold lands of the Norse, where the nights stretch long and the wind howls like a wolf across the fjords, there are stories that no fire can warm. Stories of the dead who will not rest. Of men so consumed by greed, vengeance, or pride that even death could not hold them. These are the Draugr, the walking dead of Viking legend. Neither ghost nor mere corpse, but something in between. The restless bodies of warriors and kings who refuse to relinquish their earthly power. They are said to rise from their graves by moonlight, their eyes glowing like embers, their flesh blackened and swollen with the rot of the sea. They guard their treasures with strength beyond mortal men, and their hatred endures beyond the grave. A land of living and dead. To the Norse, death was not an ending, but a crossing through, from the realm of Midgard to the shadowed world of Hel, or the shining halls of Valhalla. The dead were buried with weapons, food, and goods to sustain them in the next life. But sometimes, something went wrong. A man's soul might linger, not his noble spirit, but his darker essence, his hammer, the shape of his self, or his hua, the mind filled with rage or greed. If that spirit could not find peace, if it clung too fiercely to the world of men, it would corrupt the body it once inhabited, and thus the Draugr would rise. The Tale of Glamour. Among all tales of the undead, one from the Icelandic sagas stands above the rest. The story of Glamour, as told in Gretti's saga, written around the 13th century but echoing much older beliefs. Glamour was a great man, strong, broad, and unafraid of anything living. He worked as a shepherd in the lonely winter valleys of Iceland, tending his master's flocks through the long dark. But he was a man of arrogance who scorned the gods and refused the church. He mocked the faith, declaring he feared neither Christ nor the old powers. One Yule Eve, when others fasted in reverence, Glamour went out into the snow to watch over his sheep. A blizzard fell upon him, fierce and unrelenting. The villagers waited for him to return, but by dawn, only silence filled the valley. Days later, they found his body lying in the drifts, stiff, swollen, and grimly smiling, as though he mocked death itself. They tried to move him, but his body was heavy as stone. The men who touched him said his skin felt like iron. And when night came, he moved. The first haunting. first they heard footsteps outside the farmhouse. Then came the pounding at the doors. Sheep were found torn apart, their bones crushed. Travellers went missing in the snow. The people of the valley said Glamour's corpse had risen, cursed by the gods for his pride. His ghost was not a shadow, but solid, a corpse that walked beneath the moon, leaving deep footprints in the frost. They buried him again, deep in the frozen ground, and sealed the mound with stones. But the next night, he rose once more. No grave could hold him. The villagers fled the valley, leaving the land barren and cursed. Greta the Strong. Years later, a hero named Greta Asmundarson came to the haunted place. He was mighty and fearless, a warrior seeking to prove his strength. He had heard the stories of Glamour, how no man could defeat him, and he swore to end the terror. On a moonless night, Greta entered the abandoned farmhouse. He waited by the dying embers of the hearth, sword in hand, his breath misting in the cold. Then, through the doorway, came a sound, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through snow. The door burst open, and Glamour loomed in the darkness, huge, bloated, his skin blue-black, his eyes glowing like burning coals. His voice was deep and hollow. "You are bold, Greta. But the night is mine." The fight that followed shook the house to its foundations. Greta's sword struck the Draugr's flesh, but it cut as though through rock. They grappled, crashing through beams and walls, the wind howling around them. At last, Greta wrestled Glamour to the ground, forcing him into the moonlight. But before he died, the undead warrior fixed his glowing eyes upon Greta and spoke a curse. "You have overcome me, Greta, but my eyes shall follow you all your life. You shall grow ever more fearful of the dark until it brings your death." With a final heave, Greta broke Glamour's spine and cut off his head. He burned the body to ash and buried the bones far from men. The valley was free, but the curse endured. From that night on, Greta the Strong was haunted by dread. He could no longer bear the night. Shadows whispered to him. He slept by firelight, always watching. And in the end, his fear led to his downfall. Slain by men he could have easily defeated, had Glamour's curse not broken his spirit. The nature of the Draugr. The sagas describe many kinds of Draugr. Some were guardians, ancient kings who rose from their barrows to protect their treasures. Others were murderers, jealous lovers, or oath breakers who returned to torment the living. They could grow in size, control the weather, even ride the winds like a storm. The smell of decay followed them. They could crush men with supernatural strength, or slip through walls as mist. Their touch brought madness or death. And unlike spirits, they were physical, their bodies rotting yet powerful, the corpse animated by something unholy, the corrupted will of a man who could not let go. The belief and the burial. In the Viking Age, fear of the Draugr shaped burial customs. Graves were sealed with stones or iron spikes. Sometimes a dead man was buried with his head turned backward, or pinned beneath a heavy slab, so he could not rise. In some regions, they broke the corpse's legs or placed shears, knives or runes of protection to bind the spirit to its grave. The Norse did not bury their dead lightly, for they knew the cost if the dead refused to sleep. Meaning and symbolism. The Draugr embodies the Norse fear of spiritual imbalance, when the dead man's hammer, his physical self, becomes twisted by his hugr, his will. It is a warning about greed, arrogance, and the refusal to surrender what is no longer ours. Just as Nebusemekh of Egypt rose to beg for remembrance, the Draugr rises not for peace, but for possession of gold, of land, of power, of life. It is death corrupted by desire. And so the Norse believed the only way to defeat such a creature was through courage and ritual, to face the horror head-on, to fight both body and spirit, and to restore balance by flame. Legacy and echoes. The legend of the Draugr never died. From Iceland to Norway, stories of the undead haunted the sagas for centuries. In later folklore, fishermen spoke of sea Draugr, corpses of drowned sailors who rose from the waves, dragging the living down to join them. In modern tales, echoes of the Draugr appear everywhere, from Tolkien's Barrow Wights in The Lord of the Rings to the revenants of video games and cinema. The image of the corpse that guards its grave, swollen with greed and rage, is as old as fear itself. The eternal night. Even now, on the lonely plains of Iceland, there are ancient mounds no one dares disturb. Shepherds whisper that strange lights flicker above them on winter nights. That sometimes, if you stand too long near the old cairns, you can hear the sound of heavy breathing beneath the earth. The Draugr sleeps, but lightly. And if the wind rises and the moon glows red over the fjord, it is said that the restless will stir again, not because of hatred or hunger alone, but because the living have forgotten how thin the line between life and death truly is. The story of the Draugr completes our journey through the ancient world's hauntings, from the ghost bride of Greece to the vengeful spirit of Japan, from Egypt's pleading dead to the icy barrows of the north. Across every culture, one truth remains. The dead are never far, only waiting to be remembered or feared. This has been Lilly's Viking adventure, and tonight, we have walked with the dead. If you enjoyed this journey through the shadows of ancient history, remember to like, subscribe, and check the description below for links to our sources and to our store, Viking Adventure Gifts, where the spirit of the old world lives on in every design. Much love. And until next time, may your hearth be warm and your ghosts be kind. Special thank you to our paid subscribers on our social media platforms: Larry Thompson, Kristen K. Cantrell, Ron Wheeler, Logan Gear, Norbert Klaus Joseph Sandel. I appreciate you so very much.
Yeah.